and oh no, you're not supposed to do it.
I wasn't trying to do that. It said the webinar is being recorded by the host.
So we started the webinar, and that means that, well, no, that our participants are here too.
It says recording, but I can pause it. Okay, welcome folks. We're going to get started in just about a minute. Give folks a little bit more time to log on. But before, you can go ahead and start entering questions in the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can. We want to keep this brief to honor everyone's time, particularly our candidate Kina Collins' time. We hope to wrap this up in a half an hour. We have been doing a lot of these, and it seems to work well when we keep it relatively brief. My name is Kevin Martin. I'm the president of Peace Action, and as a former Chicago resident, I'm very pleased tonight to be hosting this webinar, this Meet the Candidates Forum for Kina Collins, an outstanding candidate that has earned Peace Action's endorsement for the 7th Congressional District of Illinois. So I looked a little bit at Kina's background, her profile on her website, which I encourage you to read. Kina's born and bred and raised in Austin, in a great neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. She is a lifelong activist, nationally recognized, not just in the Chicago area, nationally recognized on issues like gun violence prevention, healthcare issues, women's rights issues. And as I read through her profile, what struck me was her commitment to empowering people to be part of the political process to make change. She served on President Biden's transition team and task force on gun violence prevention. And there was one sentence that really jumped out at me from the profile on the website. I want to read that. Like many who've gone unheard and unseen by the establishment, Kina didn't have much faith in government until she fought to bring the voice of the most marginalized communities into the legislative process. And that's very much what Peace Action is about, is empowering people to be part of the process to make change. Now, as I said before, you can put questions in the Q&A pane. We'll get to as many as we can. Also, we want to encourage you to donate to the campaign. We'll be posting the link in the chat for how you can donate to the campaign. I believe it's already there. We also are encouraging people to volunteer, of course, and this goes back to Peace Action's long history of supporting candidates. It's not usually the ones with the most money, but often the most people power. So volunteering for the campaign, including phone banking, is one of the most important things you can do. And also help to amplify Kina's message in her campaign online through social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. We've got that also in the chat for you, or will be. And those are all ways that you can help make this campaign. And of course, we understand it's not just about better representation for the people of the 7th district, it's about building more progressive pro-peace and justice champions, helping to build the progressive caucus, et cetera. And that's been something that Peace Action has been explicitly committed to for a long time, but especially the last few years with our candidate endorsements. Later, Charles Johnson, terrific organizer from Chicago area Peace Action, will be moderating the Q&A, and we will do our best, as I said, to get to as many of your questions as we can. I think that's it in terms of the administrative announcements from me. So without further ado, Peace Action, as I said, proud to endorse Kina Collins, and we're glad to hear from her tonight.
Thank you so much. Did you want me to do a quick intro, or?
Whatever you think is best to use your time, and whatever you think people need to know about you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kevin, and all that have tuned in today. One of my favorite things and the best things about being a candidate is stepping into community and creating brave space around issues that in a district like mine, that is a plurality African-American district, foreign affairs doesn't seem to be the tabletop issue, but it is so intimately connected to so many things that we're fighting for right now in the movement, like the national movement for the liberation of Black lives, demilitarizing our police, holding our elected officials accountable who have taken campaign donations from defense contractors or private prisons or major corporations that cause harm. But what I'm most excited about is talking about how we reimagine violence and what it actually looks like. When I was more ignorant to the foreign affairs conversation globally, I was actually invited to a trip to Israel. And while I was there, I had a high school friend, shout out to Von Steuben High School here in Chicago. It's one of the most diverse in the city, who is Palestinian, and reached out to me on Facebook and sent me her family's address that live in the West Bank. Long story short, I diverged from the trip and visited my, childhood friend's family, and I got to meet the Bedouin people and Rahat Israel. And I saw the deep connection between global poverty and also apartheid and oppression that happens. And it was hearing from the folks on the ground there that really opened my eyes that we have a consequence for not having diplomacy as leaders here in the United States, but also that we have a responsibility to not only denuclearize the globe, but to fight for humanitarian aid and infrastructure in places that have been destabilized and peoples whose voices have been oppressed. And so as a gun violence prevention advocate, the way I stepped into that work was actually experiencing a murder in my childhood neighborhood, and by way of guns, knowing the victim, knowing the shooter. And that story is all too common, not just here in the United States, but all across the globe. And so I've dedicated my life to fighting for the voices of survivors, those who live on the margins, are not pulled into the political space, and those who understand what it feels like to be ignored. Because what I knew was that the bullet was flying long before anybody pulled the trigger. When we shut down public schools, when there's lead in our water, toxins in our air, when we have people who live in food deserts, all of that is the bullet flying. And so I am, one, making a commitment to all of the peace action members, not just here in the city of Chicago, but across the nation, that I will refuse this corporate PAC money and remain a candidate for and by the people and funded for and by the people. Two, that we will link this fight around gun violence prevention domestically to a national fight of peace, a pro-peace agenda, a pro-justice agenda, a pro-liberation agenda, an agenda that promotes diplomacy. And three, that I always remain accessible to you to hold me accountable. But most importantly, in that accountability, that you give me grace and understand that I need to be taught and educated, just like anybody else who's stepping into this space. But I just want folks to know that I'm taking this very serious. I understand that once I become a member of Congress, that every vote will count, and I could be using my bully pulpit to make sure that we're pushing this pro-peace agenda forward.
Wow. Thank you, Kina. That is really just music to the ears of people on this call. And I think you are connecting issues together in a way that's really exciting for us. So I can take us into the Q&A if we're ready for that, and hear from some of our members. All right. So we have a question that had come in from James, and is wondering about your position on the size of the military budget and how that compares to your opponents.
Yeah, I've been actually kind of disappointed because our incumbent Congressman Danny K. Davis, he's been my representative since I was 5 years old, and our district it has a PVI Cook rating, which means how the district votes, of a D plus 70. that means we vote 70 points above the Republicans. So much so that we don't even have a Republican challenger in this race. First of all, the defense spending is way too much. We need to make sure that we're slashing that. Mark Pocan and Barbara Lee have introduced a piece of legislation to slash it by $100 billion. I think we can even go further. When we say that we cannot fund our education process, our access to healthcare, and things that are necessity to live, like clean water, we have a fundamental problem about the priorities. Congressman Davis has voted bill after fiscal budget after fiscal budget for this expansion of this defense budget, even when the Pentagon doesn't ask for that expansion of the budget. And so I'm making the commitment to vote against that. And I think that we have to use our voices to make sure that we are being full-throated about why we want to slash it. Congressman Davis has also known, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, over $770 billion being spent in this budget around military aid, which we know is just ways to continue to destabilize places. And I think only 28.7 billion of those dollars have been spent on national security programs. I'm going to tell you why that is important. While there's such fear mongering around international terrorism, the real domestic terrorism that we are dealing with is right here in our backyard, and it's gun violence. It's the mass shootings that continue to happen all across this country that our Congress refuses to do anything about. Immediately, they stigmatize the mental health community and those who suffer from mental health illnesses, and yet in the same breath, they do not fund mental health services. And so I think it's time for us to call out the hypocrisy, to take a bold stance in a district that is deeply progressive like ours here in the Illinois 7th. We need to make sure that we're galvanizing, educating the public, and getting them behind these common sense reforms around our fiscal budget.
Thank you so much. We have a question that is, what will you do to ban assault weapons domestically, given our focus on challenging the military-industrial complex? Can you also speak to Pentagon arms transfers to police forces?
Yeah, this is such an important thing to me. I support the banning of assault rifles because I don't believe that anybody needs an AR-15. These are guns that can rip through cars. And we have heard the gruesome and grisly stories that have come out of these congressional hearings after the Uvalde, Texas shooting of the fourth graders, young children who were just dismembered and parents couldn't even identify them. We also know that 19 police officers were standing in the hallway as this massacre was occurring. And, I hold space that was a human moment. They were petrified of what they were hearing. And if police officers are afraid of these AR-15s, what do you think civilians, how we feel about it, and people getting access so easily to these guns? So number one, we have to lift the liability shield on gun manufacturers in this country. Federally, they have skated by too often from being held accountable. While they can be sued for negligence, no one really goes after them because it's the gun lobby is really powerful, number one, and number two, they're protected, by these politicians who they are funding. I'll give you an example. Here in the city of Chicago, 60% of the guns that are recovered are coming from 3 states, mostly Indiana, Wisconsin, and Mississippi. Last year, 850 guns that were linked to homicides or violent crimes here in the city of Chicago could be traced back to one gun shop in Indiana. You are the common denominator to what is happening. And if we know this data, then we need to make sure that we're tackling it on the federal level and lifting the liability shield. As far as demilitarizing our police departments, I 100% support that. I support Representative Velasquez's bill on demilitarizing law enforcement nationally and blocking the ability for our Department of Defense to transfer arms over to our law enforcement. And that's a particular place in the defense budget that we could slash. and that we could cut and put that money back into true violence prevention and social safety net programs here in the United States. I'm an active member, a part of, the National Movement for the Liberation of Black Lives. I was endorsed by Black Lives Matter Women of Faith here in the city of Chicago, and I was one of the lead co-organizers around the killing of getting justice after the killing of Laquan McDonald. And so, it's extremely personal to me, and it's really the moment that truly politicized me and made me understand that we are spending our money in the wrong places, and arming our police with these military grade weapons are not keeping us safe.
Oh, thank you. Our next question, we have.
I see Michael's question. Can I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I support ending qualified immunity. I think it should have happened yesterday. And yes, I support reparations for the ADOS community. As a member of ADOS, I think that there's a lot of talk about more policing and over militarizing our communities, and not enough talk about the injection in a lot of the resources that we need in land and education and healthcare for American descendants of slaves. And so I am going to be a strong supporter of reparations once elected to Congress. And that has been my stance both times that I have run.
Excellent, thank you. Another question we had is a member asking about, and you had spoken on Palestine, and this member is asking positions on situations in Ukraine, and then also in the US command force in Africa, which is located in several African nations, using the 2001 authorization for use of military force as its justification to be there. So what would you say to those situations in Ukraine and then in the US command force in Africa?
Yeah, to talk about the AUMF is outdated, number one, and it is not a justification. And what is happening in Africa and the military presence there from us is one of the most overlooked, situations. And it's not a justification, just to start there. And I think that people who are trying to use the AUMF need to take a vote on it. The only people who should be authorized to use this military presence should be Congress. And I think that this is a way that there's a loophole in order for us to continue to use military forces. It's outdated. I think we need to strip it down, and I would be voting against that if it came up for a vote. I think that we need to continue to not have military engagement in the Ukraine and Russia war that is happening right now. I do not support a no-fly zone, because I think that is walking, we're teetering on a red line there. And I don't think, quite frankly, a lot of Americans want us to go to war and have a blank check for an endless war. And so I think that we should be targeting Putin's oligarchs, and we should make sure I support freezing their assets and sanctions in that way. And then I also want to be sensitive to the fact that those sanctions impact, people in these countries. And so making sure that the things that we're putting forth, that we understand it's not just the regimes that are going to feel it, but the people that are actually there on the ground. And so my best bet with Ukraine is that we continue to stay out and we don't use military force in that war. As far as Palestine goes, I believe in the liberation of the Palestinian people. And I think that they have stood so close shoulder to shoulder in the fight here in the United States of America with Black Americans who are dealing with police state sanctioned violence. And that is something that is directly linked to what they are dealing with right now. I do support conditioning aid to Israel in the same way that I would condition aid to any country that violates international human rights violations. And so I think we need to be full-throated about that as well. And we are really seeing so many activists and organizers activating in the Illinois 7th District and really looking for an active partner in their congressional member to validate a lot of the organizing work that they're doing.
Well, thank you. One of the questions also in the chat was, please talk about the dangers of sociopaths atop corporations like weapons makers and atop dictatorships like Russia.
Oh my gosh, can you repeat the first half of the question? So,
Yeah, the dangers of sociopaths atop corporations like weapons makers.
yeah. I think that, that in itself, one, I think that our congressional members should not be able to take campaign donations from these weapons makers. It's a conflict of interest. We continuously see that from people who sit on certain committees that make these decisions about how money is allocated, to decisions of if we go to war or not, and the profit that could be made from that. And I think we need to be more aggressive, especially in the Democratic Party, on making sure that we're regulating these weapons makers. And so pretty much that's my stance. And I think that the way that we can have a strong moral compass on this is by making sure that we're electing candidates who are corporate free. That the biggest issue, I can't stress this enough, and y'all will hear me continue to talk about this. The biggest issue that we have in Washington, D.C. is corruption. And it's giant corporations that have our government by the throat. And the reason why we are not investing in the things that we know keep us safe, and in the ways in which we can have a sustainable future here in our country, but also globally, we're not destabilizing places and causing harm to the civilians in these countries, is by having congressional members who can speak with a high moral authority, vote with a high moral authority, and really only respond to their constituents. And so in that way, that's how I view it.
Thank you so much. And this question, I think your answers have touched on it, certainly when you said about cutting the military budget, but it says, since the US has over 5,000 nukes, and it only takes 100 to destroy a country, should we spend $1 trillion plus, which is currently planned, to build more?
No. No, we should not. I know we should not. I would like to see that 1 trillion going into helping to eradicate and eliminate student loan debt. I would like to see us grow the GDP by opening the GDP up for people who are bogged down with student loan debt in this country, which, by the way, is more than 1 trillion. It's almost $2 trillion. And so I would like to see it go towards making sure that we're lifting people out of poverty. We're raising the standard and quality of life for people all across this country, and that we're investing in something that's way more sustainable and important, which is a Green New Deal. And we're not talking about it enough. Some of these fights are intergenerational fights, and then there are other fights that have a timeline. And the climate crisis is one of those issues that has a timeline, and we need to make sure that we're investing fully in it.
Thank you. And this question, since a lot of us on the call are peace activists, how can we activists help you make peace and justice in foreign policy a priority for the Democratic Party and caucus?
Y'all have to hold my feet to the fire. You can't let me off the hook. You can't let your representatives who currently serve you off the hook. And like I said, we have to make sure that if we're building this community of accountability, that we are also going to build a community of education. And some communities have not come as far as understanding. Some people, I come from a district where there are people who have never left their square block that they live on, the radius of their square block. And so they can imagine how, the issues in Palestine are impacting them or connected to them. And so it is a constant education process. And then once the knowledge is shared, then your representative has a duty to do what's right. And so please, when in doubt, continue to organize. But the way that the activist community, I think you best serve in this space, in this electoral space, in this legislative space, is helping us craft and create public policy, bringing the folks to the forefront who have experienced these war crimes. Quite frankly, their voices are not being heard enough. And then thirdly, making sure that we stay true to the values. I love that we're out fundraising the incumbent right now, and that I didn't have to take a dime of corporate PAC money in order to do it. It makes me feel so much more confident to fight for the things that the people in my district care about. And I would much rather be held accountable by Ms. Jones down the street than by somebody at JP Morgan Chase, right? And so please keep holding our feet to the fire, keep probing us. Iron sharpens iron.
That is very good to hear for all of us here. And we have a question about Latin America. Please talk about Honduras and your conception of the situation there. And did you want to add anything on broader Latin American relations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately America has to take accountability for the coups that have been backed against democratically elected leaders in some of these countries. And we have to take accountability for kicking the can down the road on things like immigration rights and reform that have caused folks to migrate to the United States of America because of the destabilization that has happened in places like Honduras and in Latin American countries. But ultimately, we need to switch from a model of our humanitarian aid just completely being military forces to actual humanitarian aid that benefits the people in these countries. And so I think accountability is important. I think we need to stop kicking the can down the road when we talk about immigration rights. And I think that we need to start investing in the things that we talk about as violence prevention and de-escalation here in the United States, which is a true investment in humanitarian aid, which is infrastructure, green economies, education, healthcare access in these areas. And so I want to work as a partner in that way with folks in my district, which, by the way, in our district in Illinois 7, over 100,000 people were born in another country in our district. And so they represent a large portion of folks from countries in Latin America, and just bringing them in a co-governance space.
Thank you. And it's awesome to hear you speak on that history that we so little hear from Congress members often. So, and then in the chat, we have a question: how do you stand on environmental justice, especially environmental racism? Nuclear installations are in frontline communities, and says when the nuke was closed in Zion, Illinois, the city lost about 45% of their tax base. How can this be prevented in the future?
Yeah, we need a Green New Deal. And I mean that when I say that. I'm so proud to have emerged as the environmental justice candidate in this race. We've been endorsed by the Sunrise Movement, which is the largest youth-led movement around environmental justice. Groups like People's Lobby and People's Action, which forced the vote and forced the passing of CEJA, which is the Clean Energy Jobs Act in Illinois. And all of these groups, once again, Youth Committee for Change, the Illinois Climate Strikers, they've all endorsed our campaign. Once again, I think it goes back to transitioning and transforming our budget and what that looks like and where we're investing in. And the reason why so much of the tax base was put into that was because that was the option that they had, and that was what they chose to prioritize and build. But in the next decade, we know that I believe it's $23 trillion are to be seen to be generated in the green energy and technology sector. And we need to make sure that those frontline communities like mine on the west side of Chicago, who are dealing with air pollution and water pollution, that we stand as the first folks to get those contracts around infrastructure jobs, around green energy jobs, about injecting trades and vocations back into high schools, right? And those trades and vocations are not just about building solar panels or, wind farms, but it's about coding, right? So modernizing what those trades look like and giving young Black and Brown folks the access and the ability to the most important part of the Green New Deal, which to me is economic stability in our communities. And one of the ways that I see us generating money and sustainability, I see it in the food space. We need to invest in urban farming. right? I live in a neighborhood where there are 96,000 plus people. It's the second largest neighborhood in the city of Chicago, mostly African American, and we only have 3 grocery stores. So we are what you would consider a food desert, or what the USDA considers a food desert. And I think that recapturing vacant lots and turning them into community gardens and urban farming is a way that we generate money, and we generate health, and we generate sustainability in our communities. But economically, I want to eradicate environmental racism, not just from the actual literal standpoint, but from the economic standpoint.
All right, thank you again. And our time has run short. There's a couple more great questions coming in, and we will follow up as best we can. We really appreciate people being here and being able to listen to such an awesome candidate. And Kina, for your time, is very, very appreciated. And we have some links in the chat, so we definitely encourage you to check those out. Anything you can do to donate, to volunteer. I can testify that door knocking is very satisfying, because, you know, it's like, okay, a lot of people aren't home or don't answer the door, but a lot of people do talk, and they're excited actually to hear somebody have these positions, because these are like people, you know, the public, the general public's positions. And Kina, if there's anything last that you wanted to say before we close out?
Please, I can't stress it enough. I think Charles did a really good job at talking about the field. This is going to come down to the field. It's going to come down to how many people in our district heard that they had a real option in this moment. And Congressman Davis has been my representative since I was 5 years old. And the same issues have persisted, and the same problems of not being full-throated about the things that Peace Action is fighting for is still persisting now in his campaign, and even in his tenure as our congressman. And so just with that, we are in the last 12 days of the election. We're down to the wire, and we need as many people to phone bank and door knock and text bank as possible. And we can set you up with that. That's the good news. The establishment has thrown everything at me. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has come into our district twice. We don't even have a Republican running in this race, by the way. Whoever the June 28th Democratic primary is, that's the election. And a Democrat is going to take the seat, and Democratic leadership has made it very clear that they not only don't want me in the party, but they will pony up resources to stop me from getting into the party. And the reason is because I have amazing groups like Peace Action backing me, where we're going to hold the Democratic Party accountable for what is happening, not just in our backyard, but across the globe, for the faceless, nameless people who are experiencing war right now in their countries. And we are not holding our elected officials accountable. In a time when we are talking about ending gun violence in this country, and we are seeing cases like George Floyd, Laquan McDonald, Sandra Bland, Rakia Boyd, Breonna Taylor continuously happen in communities that look like mine, this race is not just about winning this seat. It's about transforming and believing in a future that we can truly have here in our country. And so please sign up to volunteer, donate. I'm still going to make the donate acts because I'm an anti-corporate candidate, and I want to stay that way. And I just want you all to know that when we win on June 28th, it's going to be all of us that made this happen. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will sign out. And thank you, everyone. Please follow up, and we will see you out there.